record to the computer. Is it now record? It's recording. Okay. All right. So we'll just show like a molecular diagram for that first moment of discussion. Okay.
That's fine.
So yeah, sorry. So I was saying that.
Oh, okay. we'll just blame the internet delay between Australia and the US, which I assume you're in. There's a lot of ocean for the internet signal to cross.
Exactly.
And not my bad timing of when to interject. I've been running since 2011. I mean, the content was very different then because I was like a teenager, and what I thought a good YouTube video was back 10 years ago is very different to what it is today. I mean, YouTube was very different too. Everything was a bit sensational. And I think now it's fantastic to be able to just do chemistry and have an audience for it. Because 10 years ago, I didn't think that was possible. You had to make things exciting and relevant and like pop science sort of thing. But now, there's a whole lot of channels as well that are coming to the same realization that you can just do things and show it, and it's like people are really into that, and it's great to see. Absolutely.
Yeah, and even on a like more basic level, just filming chemistry is something that is not done historically. Like if you were wondering what a reaction looked like from a historical paper, you're pretty much out of luck. Like there might be some skeletal description if it were something really remarkable, like something explosive or extremely exothermic, or something that emitted light or caused some kind of dramatic color change. But often even color changes would not be mentioned. And so and so
you see that a lot. There's a lot of descriptions of what things look like, but you expect to then go on Google Images and think, oh, I'm going to know what this like ruthenium thing looks like or something, and there's just never any pictures. And you think, like, how are there no pictures of this thing? Like so many Wikipedia page articles, it's just a structure, and you think, like, surely, like, people work with this stuff every day, like, and there's not a picture of it I can find on the internet, and that's the case for so many compounds. And you think, oh, like, why? I think people just have an aversion to filming and like the actual chemistry, and think, oh no, they're used to describing things, and a lot of scientific papers. So many, like all the chemistry stuff, no one ever puts a picture of, this is what the crystals look like. This is what my setup looks like. It's like you just describe what it looks like, and you don't put any pictures of like, oh, it was this, this colored solution. Like, just, I don't know. It seems to be a bit lacking in terms of like, just demonstrate what the thing looks like through the picture rather than trying to describe it.
Right. And there's no narrative component either. So it's like someone might say like, oh, only use this amount of this catalyst because that's optimal or something. But what they're not saying is like, because when I used more than that amount, there was a black tar that was totally impossible to remove from glassware that I spent 2 days cleaning up, or like whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's, you see a bit of that. Like the older the paper is, the more you see that. And it's fantastic to see things where like, oh, we tried to do this and this exploded and this didn't work and I lost this apparatus. And, it's like, it's so good to see people saying, oh yeah, we did it because this way, because every other thing we tried did this and this really badly. But you don't see so much that these days. It's just like, we did it in this, first try, we did it this way and it worked perfectly.
And then like, even like little tricks that a certain chemist or a certain lab might use often just stay within that lab because it's not within the scope of a scholarly publication. And so it's like I've learned so much just traveling around the world, going to different labs and seeing the way different chemists work. And it's like, it's just amazing how regionally specific different routes of purification are, how some people like never run columns, some people only do distillation, some people never do distillation. Like it's very, you'd think for a science there would be a more universal practice, but it's like, I guess that's the art of it. There's like this whole element that is never documented that is extremely interesting. And I think like some of that is coming across for the first time on YouTube.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic to be able to do things like just be like, oh, I'm going to do it this way. And then, you get all these comments from people, because like, and just go back to when I started out, like I never think, actual people doing chemistry would watch the stuff that I make. But like people, I say, oh, I'm just going to do this. And then people come in like, oh, I did my PhD on this subject and blah, blah, blah. And they're usually all really helpful. Like no one's trying to like shout down at me and say, and like people say, oh, I always, do this way and, clamp the condenser this way. And, you can't do that. And, but just do it, like yeah. Sometimes you just do things and, because people are so used to doing things in a certain way and not really questioning it, that if you just say, oh, fuck it, let's just do it a different way and it
Yeah.
works fine, then it's great.
Yeah. And just for anyone that's listening that is not part of the
Oh yeah.
chemistry YouTube sphere, could you give me like, and you've been part of this world longer than I have, could you give me like a rundown of the other channels and what sorts of stuff people are doing? I mean, do you have like, I imagine you're kind of aware of, it seems like you're aware of the other big players
Right.
in the
Yeah. In the field. Yeah. Well, there's sort of, I guess there's a lot of people doing energetics, because I have two channels. I've got Explosions&Fire and Extractions&I, and it's very nice to be able to. Explosions&Fire is about energetic things that catch fire, explosives, and there's a lot of channels in this sort of area that do sort of similar things, but it starts to cross over with people who are guns and ammunition and that sort of thing, and that starts to bleed into there, and that's not really what I'm about. I barely ever held a gun. I but then the other side, Extractions&I, is really just about home chemistry and just doing reactions. And a lot of that is to feed into Explosions&Fire, because there's a lot of explosives that are multi-step that I have to, do a certain step that isn't, terribly, exciting is not really the word, but doesn't make a video in its on the main channel. So it'll be a whole long explanation on the second channel, and then it'll be about 10 seconds or something on the main channel. So there's a lot of people in the energetics world. There's like sort of small players like there's this guy called DBX Labs, and I've got to forget all of these reactive chem that are doing. And when I say explosives, there's a lot of there's a lot of people that are, oh, I'm going to get a bag of ammonium nitrate and shoot it on a gun range and it explodes. But the stuff I'm really into is like, hey, look, there was this paper published 2 years ago on like furoxanes and like these novel melt cast explosives or something, and hey, I'm going to do it in my backyard with like an old butter container and some phosphorus pentoxide I've got from the grey market, and that's fantastic. But and then on the other side, there's a lot of smaller channels off the top of my head, like corrosion and yeah. But I mean, the big players are like definitely Nile Red. I mean, Nile Red sort of sets the bar in terms of like just doing a reaction. Sort of, there's some plot to it in the sense that there's some story, like I've got to turn this into this, or I'm trying to make this from this. It's and it'll do that. And then there's Nerd Rage, who's kind of the OG in terms of like he was there. I mean, he inspired me to start my channel in 2011. So he was posting videos in 2009 sort of thing, like really early, like 240p type YouTube of, and he's some sort of chemistry professor somewhere.
I've met him. I've done
So he
chemistry.
says, "Oh, you've met him. All right, good, confirmed. He exists." I mean, it's a very long con if he's just some random guy in a garage. All right. Oh, this is the scoop of the year then. And Chem Player is another big one who got deleted about 2 years ago. but they were very
Were they the ones that were doing like the sort of amphetamine adjacent stuff occasionally?
yeah, it was very, because there was, it was easy to say like, oh, how can they get deleted? They didn't show any drug synthesis, but like if you got to a point where you understood sort of the chemistry enough, you're like, this is very adjacent stuff, very, very adjacent. It was like, toluidinide, and we're just gonna, do the Hoffman degradation, and a bit of acetylation, and it was a lot of, you know, but so naturally there's lots of archives of that exist, and I'm sure that will go on forever. But they were interesting too, because they were anonymous, and the video editing, it was like text to speech, sort of over the top.
Yeah.
So it sort of made people realize that it wasn't like this big personality based channel. People were just doing things, being able to remain completely anonymous. I mean, yeah, no one knows where they are from. One of them, I think it's two of them. One of them nearly turned up at my house once. It was very strange. I got an email like, "Oh, we're around the corner. We're at a winery." I was like, they didn't turn up. So it was super strange. But it was this idea of just saying, people are into the chemistry just for, want to see the reaction. Maybe people were into it just because it was drug adjacent, but it was a lot bigger than that. And so those were the big players in terms of, So there's been a lot of smaller channels who are just like, hey, we're just going to make this cobalt complex and synthesize it and not worry about getting in front of the camera and dancing around or whatever, like I sometimes tend to do. So yeah, it's sort of a bit accessible. It's nice.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like, I guess I didn't realize, like, I'd seen Cody's lab and I thought there was a lot of this sort of like metallurgy, gold refining stuff, which is a little bit less interesting to me. And then I'd assumed that people would just be too afraid to do anything with explosives. So I never even really looked. And also it's sort of weird. Like, I think with many chemists, they first are interested in explosives. That seems to be the typical trajectory when I talk to many different types of chemists. Whatever they end up doing later in their career, usually the first thing that they care about is explosives, or maybe but for when I was a child, like I would read like the Anarchist Cookbook or steal this book, and like it just wasn't possible to get potassium nitrate or really anything in the United States. Like maybe now in retrospect, I think like, oh, I could have maybe gotten it from like a stump remover or something. But like, it's just this knowledge was not disseminated in the same way. So I could like get books on Amazon about how to make explosives, but I couldn't, like, I don't think you could buy chemicals on Amazon and eBay at that time when I was a child. I mean, I even like resorted to impersonating my science teacher in middle school to get a chemical supply catalog so that I could order chemicals, because it was so hard to get this stuff. And just like that, it was enough of a barrier that I basically couldn't do chemistry as a child. It was too frustrating. And then I always like post 9/11, like just thought of like explosive chemistry as like the worst thing, like even worse than drug related stuff, like the kind of thing where like, I don't like the concept of lists or like getting put on a list, because I think it's just like a boogeyman concept that like that like scares people from being free. Like people are always like, oh man, you're on a list. It's like,
mate, people comment all the time like, I'm going to be in a list watching a video. I can tell you, like, I recently have got a government security clearance. Me, who's been running a channel about explosives, and so the lists either don't exist or they're built on, layers of racism that just don't affect me, which I have a feeling it's the second one, because, being named Tom, I think lets me get away with a lot more things in Australia anyway. We're pretty biased in terms of like, the lists, but which is a terrible thing. But yeah, but like this concept of lists, like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that being said, someone could turn up tomorrow and arrest me, but
Yeah.
it's been a decade now, and
I mean,
yeah,
I think it's just they've really successfully scared people. Like that's the
absolutely.
real it's the concept of the list is more powerful than any actual list. And so
Oh yeah,
people
and
police themselves because they're constantly terrified.
and absolutely, and in a way, I find that it's nearly covert war on drugs as well. You ever thought about this? Like the fact that this idea that, oh, what if your neighbor is making explosives? If they've got a lab, report them. And this idea of like checking everyone at the airport for explosives, that's all like, there hasn't been a single terrorism incident in the US caught by the TSA.
Oh yeah, it's
Like
all it's
there's
completely
never been an explosive thing. But the reason they keep doing it is because it's sort of a drug checking thing as well. I mean, it's a deterrent. You can say, oh, it's a deterrent, it stops people, but like so much of that idea of taking the fear of explosives and saying, oh yeah, well, and using it to get people for drug related crimes, I find that's a huge thing as well, because this idea of using this fear of people making explosives or people having explosives, or we've got to check they could have explosives, and then it's like, oh look, they're holding this or something, and then it's this huge thing. Or what if like, I know meth labs blow up or something, but like this all the time in Australia, it's like, what if it blows up? They're labs. You could be living next door and it could explode. Explosives. Like using that fear to push the drug agenda, and yeah. So you do feel kind of a bit caught on that. But back to your earlier point, if I can, because I think this is what you wanted to talk about, or whatever, is just this like this availability of chemicals, or like how hard it is to do chemistry or sort of thing. And a lot of people have this notion that you said, that it's just like it's really hard to get things. And also there's a lot of thoughts, a lot of people say, oh, it wasn't like it used to be, like the good old days. You could just go down and bloody, like go to my local pharmacy and, I'll have a pint of acetic anhydride, thanks. And they, give it to you and it'd be 3 shillings or whatever. A lot of people think that's, that was the glory days of chemistry. But like, I think it's fantastic now. And there's a lot of, I think, because a lot of things have stopped being labeled as chemicals, and they've kind of gone underground in terms of like just the marketing, because there's this idea that if you're, no one wants to buy a bag of chemical from the store, but that doesn't mean they don't exist, And so, and it's kind of the game, really. I mean, for the YouTube chemistry community, is to keep beating these sort of regulations, or if a chemical gets phased out, what can you do about it? And you find that if chemicals get phased out all the time for, because people say, oh, uh, drug related concerns, or, it's unhealthy, or, the only people buying it is the amateur chem community. So, they get kind of pulled from shelves, and that happens quite quickly in some cases. But usually then it creates a gap in the market and something else gets phased back in. So you see that in the US, they sell, pints of toluene or whatever, which is, very useful. And that's sort of getting phased out as sort of like this paint stripper or whatever. And so that's disappearing from a lot of shelves. But what's appearing in its place is like ethyl acetate, and you just buy that instead. And that's nearly just as useful.
oh,
And
it's
you see it
better.
like, yeah, and there's things like that happen all the time. Like, I think there's a lot of methyl ethyl ketone in hardware stores, which I think might get less and less over time, because people are worried about people making methyl ethyl ketone peroxide, which is this explosive that's pretty bad and far too easy to make, and has been used in a bit of terror-related incidents. But if they phase that out, this sort of the PVC welding cement, then what tends to get phased in is this sort of THF acetone mixtures for the pipe welding stuff. And then all of a sudden you get THF at your local hardware store. And I'm seeing a bit of that come in as well. And chemicals like, I had a bit of a list here, like erythritol. So erythritol is this sugar sweetener that didn't really exist 10, 15 years ago. I mean, it's a good sugar sweetener, but you can nitrate it pretty easily and form this compound called erythritol tetranitrate, which is
Oh,
ETN, which is pretty equivalent to PETN. So you can go to your supermarket. Well, I know I can, and you can buy a big bag of, for $3 or something. It's not called. It's not like stamped erythritol and it's got the chemical formula on it. It's called like monk fruit, and it's got some shit about like, oh, the ancient monk fruit thing, and we go to the Tibetan highlands and sweetener, and not stevia. And you look it up and it's just some like fermentation process in a huge lab somewhere, and they just pump out these crystals and they put a little bit of something in there just to like make it so it's like off-white. But you just use it straight as is, straight into the nitration. Beautiful, like one of the best amateur explosives. And you couldn't do that 10 years ago. So it's this idea of, and that'll probably get phased out, but then they'll probably phase in a different sugar alcohol, which probably will just work as well, like a xylitol, or there's a couple others like a mannitol hexanitrate. There's yeah, it's so there's this constant game of, the nitrates are a big one, because I used to be able to get, and I'm not, I haven't been doing it for that long, but I used to be able to get these bags of ammonium nitrate as instant cold packs. So they have ammonium nitrate prills and a little sachet of water in them, and then you break the sachet of water, and then the water would just go into the ammonium nitrate and it would get cold. Ever done that, like a sporting injury sort of thing?
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
you look like a sporty guy, and
Well, I've seen them before.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. And then yeah, so they get cold really quickly. And they're common. Like there used to be ammonium nitrate in every single one of them. It used to be about 200 grams of ammonium nitrate. Get that for about $8. Beautiful. I'd go to the pharmacy, be like, oh yeah, I've got a lot of injuries coming up. I'll grab three, 3 packs of instant cold packs. They pulled that from shelves virtually overnight in here, because of the ammonium nitrate concerns, and replace it with urea, or some other similar thing. They work half as well now. So if you get a sporting injury and someone makes an instant cold pack, they don't work nearly as well. But so the nitrates, they pretty much disappeared. But you'll see that because urea works really badly, they'll probably phase something else in, some other chemical, whether that be ammonium chloride or some obscure organic thing, and then finding out something to do with that. And a lot of the fertilizers, the nitrates have gone out, but they're trying to phase in a lot of high nitrogen non-nitrate fertilizers. So there's a lot of calcium cyanamide coming in to hardware stores. I haven't seen it in Australia yet, but it's sort of coming a bit more common. And that was a big precursor I used for the tetrazole synthesis, cyanamide. It was about halfway along. I had to make it from urea and calcium oxide or something like that. So it makes like tetrazole synthesis really easily if you could get this big bag of calcium cyanamide from the hardware store, which will happen in a couple of years. And then I think my final example, sorry, I just keep rattling off examples, but like there's this idea of like with pool chemicals, no one wants to be like, oh, I fill my pool with chemicals. So there's an increasing push, and also chlorine. Chlorine's getting a bit of a bad rap just because it's chlorine, and people are like, oh, there's chlorine in my eyes. And so you kind of want to be that one wanker on the street to be like, my pool is chlorine free. So we're seeing more and more, there's these chlorine free pool chemicals coming in. So, but they're all like, because they're all like peroxide based, all really powerful oxidizers. So there's like peroxy monosulfate is this really good one, that I saw 2 weeks ago in the hardware store, about a month ago, and I just hadn't seen it there. It's just a new product, and I'm like, holy shit! Like I'm going to use it to oxidize the tetrazole to a tetrazole N-oxide, and like it's like these really powerful oxidizers come in to replace the chlorine ones, will not even like be an alternative. And so there's this constant like, there's less DCM paint strippers, but I'm seeing more DMSO based ones. And it's like, yeah. So there's this constant cycle of things moving through the hardware store, and like less and less being labeled. But this idea of every chemical sort of tending towards being acetone or bleach, every cleaning product is bleach, every, paint remover, cleaning product or otherwise is acetone, just isn't true. Like there's just a lot of things coming in and out, and so it's as good as today as it ever has been. It's just different things, and this ability to adapt is really like the fun bit for me, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I wish people understood that. Like, I see that all the time in the US. There'll be a product and it'll say like acetone free nail polish remover, and they
yeah,
package it as if it's not something else. Like, okay, well now it's
yeah,
now it's something else. Or like it will say like DCM free paint stripper, as if, or even like with like BPA sealant in cans when everyone was like terrified of BPA, so they say BPA free, but there's probably something else that's just as bad. It just isn't BPA anymore.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
like all that people care about, is not having the one bad, the thing that they think is bad, even though it's being replaced with something that's probably less researched and as bad, if not worse.
yeah,
And of
yeah,
course, there's the globalization of the chemical trade, where you can get things directly
absolutely,
from China, which is like really
yeah,
a pretty serious game changer.
absolutely, yeah, and I mean, just being able to like have obscure things and just get them, and they always China always bloody mislabels my packaging, and I get slashed open at customs, you know, because they're just a mislabeled white bag of powder, but like I still get delivered. So yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
it's amazing.
it's a better time. It is a better time. It's like
Yeah,
it is the
absolutely.
best time in history, actually. It's just different, and
Yeah,
I suppose it's not, maybe not the best time in history for explicit purchasing of chemicals in
mm,
brick and mortar shops, but if you take into account the internet and all the weird other stuff that's circulating, it's the best time in history. And the dissemination of information as well, like the way
yeah, absolutely. I
people
mean, that's the
can,
thing. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I the thing the way I see amateur chem going, and the way I would like it to, is this sort of self sufficiency, or being able to do cool chemistry from things that could never be sort of taken away. So whether that be like I got an ozone generator like 2 years ago or something like that, and the possibilities of just doing something with, you know, the ozone generator, like the literature on ozone is huge. You could do a lot of stuff, and it's just using, you know, your dry air or whatever. Or people building like Birkeland air reactors where you run an arc through air and make nitric acid from the nitrogen in the air. Or, you know, like doing simple chemistry from like, I know aspirin's a big one, because, you know, I always remember, you know, nitrate. You nitrate aspirin, you can turn it pretty much directly into picric acid, which is like the number one explosive from World War One, well, pre-World War One. And like, you know, it's aspirin is like everywhere, and, you know, like going in as a 17-year-old and just buying like 4 packs of aspirin, you know, the shop assistant probably thought I was just going to go home and, you know, take them all and do something horrible, but no, it's just, I'm just going to turn this into you know,
You've done
one
that
of the world's
before?
most popular explosives. Yeah,
That's cool. I've
yeah,
never even heard of that. I mean, I've heard picric acid. I didn't know that people made it from aspirin.
yeah, because it's got that acetyl group, whatever. But if you just heat it with the sulfuric acid in the nitration bath beforehand, the acetyl group just like decarboxylates or whatever. Acetyl group, yeah, yeah, and so you're left with like sort of phenol in situ, and then you just add your nitrate salt and go from there. And not that I'm, but this is the thing. Like, it feels weird to tell people this sort of thing, but it's like, you know what I mean? Like, you must be in the same boat where it's like, people, you know, people say you can't tell people how to like make an explosive, but it seems so obvious to me. It seems like, you know, I tell people, like, I hold a knife and I'm like, you could use this knife to stab someone, and it's like, oh, you can't tell that, you know, like people didn't know knives could stab people. Well, no, like, it's like an obvious thing, you know, that, you know, it's the chemistry, it works. Like, you can't just deny that a thing works. It's just like, you have to say, you know, hey, it's not a good idea to stab people, obviously, you know,
Right.
but knives are still useful. You're not going to be like, wow, you know, knives are sharp, but they're only ever sharp when I use it for cooking. Like, no, that's not correct. You can't have these sort of facts about the chemistry, like, hey, this synthesis from aspirin works, you know, like, it's not the information itself isn't wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's not wrong to tell people that. Well, at least that's what I think anyway.
Oh, yeah, I think it protects people ultimately. Like the only people you might have more connections in this realm. I'm sure you do. The only people I know that have been hurt by explosives have been hurt getting arrested for doing things with explosives. I don't know anyone who has hurt themselves with an explosive.
Yeah, no, there has been some, and it's definitely,
Not to say that it can't.
accidents do happen. Pardon?
I wasn't suggesting that it can't happen. I'm aware.
Oh no, yeah, no, absolutely, and it's a risk, and I sort of do have to tread this line of, I don't actually want people to do what I do, and it doesn't. When people say, oh, I'm going to follow this prep that you did, it doesn't. It's never like I'm never like, yeah, other people are doing it too. I kind of don't want other people to do it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to encourage. Like I'm here to encourage chemistry in a sense. Like people say, oh, I'm going to university now. That's great, but there's this idea of like it does, and and there's the potential that I've just been lucky. Like you have to you can't take things to granted too much. Like things could have happened to me. I've been very good to not have any serious accidents, and a lot of that is about setting up scenarios where even if the things go really wrong, you're not going to be injured. And that's the sort of the number one safety thing, if I could just get that in, is just there's a lot of safety. People get confused because there's a lot of safety things around these days, risk assessments, operating procedures or whatever. But what about boils down to, and you're never going to do that at home. You're never going to print off your own risk assessment and fill in the little risk matrix and tick it, and it's too much to ask people to do that. But asking people to say, think about if everything goes wrong, what happens, and am I prepared for that to happen? So you say, if all of this explosive detonates at once, what happens? Am I prepared for that? Say, well, if I'm making 2 kilos and it all goes at once, I'll die. And you say, well, I'm not really prepared to die, so maybe I should scale it back, and say, well, if it all goes off at once, I'm a little bit removed. There doesn't look like there's so much shrapnel here, so I'll probably be okay. So the worst case scenario is I'll probably be okay, and that's a lot better than just saying, because the worst way a lot of people do it is they say, well, I just won't get things wrong. Things won't go wrong, so I'll be okay. It's like, no, you got to assume that things could potentially go wrong, because they do. And there are accident reports online where people, there's a big one on Science Madness where a guy lost his hand.
Oh, I read that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Horrible.
And that's yeah. And he's living with that. And that's, and he was a professional, he had something go wrong. And
this is the guy whose glassware broke.
Yeah. So yeah, he had glassware that he was recrystallizing the ETN. Yeah. Sorry. So I said good things about ETN, but yeah, recrystallizing ETN over an open flame, I think. And the glassware did crack, and the flammable, I think it was an ethanol or methanol or something, did go over the flame. And it ended up exploding anyway. So he only had a couple of seconds to react. There's probably not much he could do. But that idea of, if that scale he's working on, those sort of accidents do happen. Whereas if you're working on like a less than 1 gram scale, which is what I do, those sort of things don't tend to happen as much, because there's such a big difference between 10 grams of something burning in a fire and 1 gram of thing burning in a fire, because with the 1 gram, it just doesn't tend to be able to reach detonation. Whereas as soon as you increase the mass, you've got this ability. There's sort of a critical mass thing about reaching detonation. And so if it never reaches detonation, you'll be fine. Things burn, and that's all right. But if things are scaled up to the point where they can sort of run away and blow up, then, that's it's bad, not just because I bang on about scale all the time and being able to do things and energetics on the smallest scale you possibly can. And it's not just because, 3 grams has, 10 times the energy that 300 milligrams has. It's because 300 milligrams can't blow up often as easily as 3 grams can. You get a lot of effects that come from that mass self-confinement, this ability to DDT through the thing if something catches fire. So it's just the risks really, really increase with mass. Sorry, I've forgotten what the question is. You've just let me ramble here.
No,
But yeah.
it's really like, I'm kind of grateful that I haven't explored it as an adult. It was like, because it's all kind of frightening enough to deal with without that additional like risk of explosion. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think I've ever worked with anything that was, I've always joked about the idea of like a psychoactive explosive. Like
Yeah.
I guess like TNT. Wait, is it? No, it's nitroglycerin that is like a vasodilator, of course. And
Yeah.
and and I've always wondered if you could make some kind of like azide containing picrate salt or something that would
Yeah.
be both
Yeah.
psychoactive and explosive. But yeah, for the most part,
There's reports out of Vietnam. I don't know if you've seen this, but they were
oh, I
using
have, yes,
yeah,
yeah,
where they're eating the plastic explosives.
yes. I've
Yeah,
seen it.
yeah. So as far as I understand it, they were doing it to try and get it out of serving or something like that. A lot of them were trying to eat large amounts of the plastic explosives so they'd get sent home on medical, but a lot of them were getting sent back out within 24 hours after eating like large amounts of explosives, and they were fine. But a lot of them had seizures and stuff, and yeah, so it's
Yeah,
bordering on psychoactive, I suppose. But
that's
yeah,
really weird. Like I've seen those case reports, and I've always wondered what was going on there. Do they say in the case reports that that's what they were doing, or is that like
I th- oh
outsider?
I read, yeah, I think that was the outside report, but
Yeah.
I think so. And I think in the case reports, because they were really worried about the interaction with ethanol to increase like the blood solubility or something like that. So there's these like people who are like, oh, for breakfast I had like 2 cans of beer and like a stick of plastic explosives. and like and then get admitted to hospital, have some seizures, and then they sent them back out and they were back, on the front lines in Vietnam within a day. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
it is
So,
crazy. Yeah.
but not
Wow.
many other explosives you could eat a stick of and be okay. A lot of them are pretty toxic. I mean, the azides and the nitro groups tend to not play well with your body, as far as I understand it.
There are some out there. I mean,
Oh yeah,
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, there are bioactive azides that are not
right.
deadly poisons, and there's a lot of nitro compounds that are
Mm. Okay.
psychoactive. Yeah. Even
Well, you're interested in Cubane stuff, aren't you?
yeah, I'm extremely interested in Cubane. I went to U Chicago where Philip Eaton teaches, and I was always
Mm.
like, oh man, I've got to talk to Philip Eaton, and
Yeah.
I reached out to him and I was like, can we talk? And he was like, I don't have time. So
Oh,
that was like my
because he's
only
he's the guy. Yeah, he synthesized it in the '60s or something, and he's been
yeah.
basically on a lot of the Cubane publications ever since. He's the guy. But he's the guy, and he knows it.
He's the fucking master. Yeah, he's master of the cube, and I just thought it was like, I don't know, like it's I'd never seen a synthesis like that before. It's like molecular origami. Like there's just
Yeah.
something about like the kind of like forcing of the molecule into this incredibly strained conformation. Like it was just such an amazing synthesis.
Yeah.
And what it's like 15 steps or something or more maybe.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
so impressive. And then I kind of like became very interested in the possibility of like psychoactive Cubane derivatives and even like I don't know if you followed this, but like around 2010 there was like a kind of in the UK there was like this craze with this drug mephedrone, and
Vaguely, yeah.
every tabloid was constantly reporting on method, like really salacious, potentially fabricated stories about this drug mephedrone, and they're like the UK press in particular was just obsessed with
Yeah.
reporting on like the new designer drug scare. And I was like, these journalists are such fucking fools that I bet I could contact the Sun and tell them that I'm a chemist and that I like did research on Cubane and that now people are using Cubane as a drug and that it's like this like powerful new designer drug. So I like wrote the Sun an email in 2010, like telling them that Cubane was this new drug on the street. And they just like immediately responded to me and they were like, we need to talk about this. Like, we're ready to talk. And I was like, yeah, let's talk. Here's my phone number. And then one of them called me, the journalist called me on the phone. And at that point I was like, I don't know. Like, I guess I proved that it's possible to get this far. Like, do I want to go so far as to actually contribute to misinformation that's circulating in British tabloids or this like completely absurd idea? But then, and specifically, I was telling them that it was, I wasn't saying it was Cubane itself. I was saying it was like this drug mephedrone, but with like a Cubane substituent on the benzene ring. And, but then I started thinking like, well, maybe not as a joke. Like maybe this is, you know, of course you have like adamantane and you have like carborane, you have all these like really bulky groups that are bioactive. Like, why not Cubane? So then I started thinking like, yeah, I want to get my hands on specifically cubalamine. Like if I could get a little cubalamine, then I could do some really interesting stuff with it. And and like I was, it's like, it's still not quite available enough, but it's been this like, you know, this like fantasy of mine to make Cubane compounds for so long. And then when you started posting these videos, like a home synthesis of Cubane, it was so exciting. I was like, oh man, this is like, this is truly badass chemistry.
Yeah. There's been a lot of developments recently about it, and in terms of industrial processes as well. So it's coming. So they're commercially available where they weren't before, and I'm not sure my home chemist will pull it off, but I'll be amazed if I can, because a lot of people, because the Philip Eaton original 60s synthesis was kind of held up as this is how you make it kind of thing. Everyone sort of looked at it, 15 steps, nah. But over the years since the 60s, people have been, oh yeah, this and that and something. And then, you know, but there was this sort of in the late 90s, you know, these papers that are just kind of using, oh yeah, we use a bit of hydrochloric here, a bit of, you know, a bit of UV light, a bit of sodium hydroxide. And you sort of read that and you think like, shit, that's my local hardware store kind of thing. Like there's nothing, you know, technique wise, it's very difficult, but from it's very different than the original 60s one. And the fact that there's no sort of specific weird chemicals that I didn't have to really try to get, it's crazy. I mean, potentially bromine, but you know, I class it as a hardware store chemical sort of, but it's not really. I mean, it's a bit more serious than that.
But it's available.
To make it and everything like that. But it's available, yeah.
That's all. I mean, so what are you gonna do? I was very disturbed when I saw that you were gonna stop making these videos in the middle of the Cubane synthesis. Not now, not when things are just heating up on the Cubane synthesis.
I know. I've got to do the UV step, and I'm worried because a lot of the steps so to sort of close this ring and start forming the cube, they sort of pump a whole lot of UV light into it, and it does this sort of cycloaddition thing. But there's a lot of mercury lamps and really high powered, a lot of UV light, and I've went out and bought myself a reptile light that produces UVB, and it's about 25 watts. And so it's about a tenth of what the papers are using. And it took them several days. So I could potentially be running this one experiment for 2 months, you know, just this like little flask basking under some reptile lamp. But it'd be fantastic if it does, because, you know, like mercury lamps are sort of getting a bit, you know, I don't know, they're harder to get, but reptile lamps are on the up, you know, reptiles. So so if it works, it'll be really great. But it's kind of the big bottleneck of the synthesis is definitely this UV step. Whereas because even the people on some people who did the paper that I'm following on this Cubane contacted me on Twitter, which was wild. And they, asked if there was any advice for the UV step, and they basically said just pray and hope it works, which is never what you want to hear from the authors of,
Well, that's another
once again,
example.
yeah.
Like, is there a single photograph of Cubane on the internet?
I mean, it's not really around, sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's coming, but it's I mean, I keep making all this stuff just to blow stuff up, and you keep like muddying the waters in terms of, I mean, like in a nice way. Like I always want to do xenon chemistry, and I watched your bloody xenon thing from season 3 of your show, which, can I interject, is an absolute sensational. Your new series, by the way, it's a masterpiece. It's so good. But that xenon episode is wild, and now I'm gonna, get a cylinder of xenon and think, oh, this is the psychoactive stuff that, it's like, no, I just want to blow stuff up. And it was the Cubane, it never even occurred to me that you could and you're probably right in the sense that sort of designer drugs or, swapping out the Cubane, a benzene ring for a Cubane ring, for like an amphetamine derivative of a Cubane, it's probably going to be the biggest sort of trend in designer drugs. Well, not the biggest trend, but the biggest change in a designer drug that we see, because functionally a Cubane could act like a benzene group in the body, really. And potentially,
because it's non-planar, like substituents on the Cubane could play in so many different directions 3-dimensionally that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So there's all kinds of weird possibilities that are very exciting.
But chemically, how you describe that and how you legislate that is so different than saying, oh, we're going to chuck an ethyl group there where there was a methyl group and get around the law. It's easy to, but changing out a whole benzene group for something different, so it's not even, is very, very interesting. So, but yeah, my greasy backyard lab, I'm not sure but it'll be even if we get there. And there's a lot of push for this Cubane stuff because it's this high density material, a lot of energy density in it because of all the strained bonds, that there's this push sort of from the war effort, collective war effort worldwide to make better whatever.
Right. So what are you going to do with the Cubane? Like, if you succeed, what is your plan with the Cubane?
Well, the plan is to make a video for Explosions&Fire where I, light some on fire, make some explosives out of it, see how I go. Because that's where because I've got a Patreon, right, and it's linked to the main channel, so people donate a small amount, and I'm forever thankful that people can do that. For when I upload a main channel video, they pledge a small amount, and that comes through when I put up a main channel video. But it means that I got all this work to do for the Cubane, and I don't get any income for it until I finish it and make a main channel video and then put it up, and then I get the Patreon for it. So I have a lot of these projects where I think like, oh yeah, that'd be good. I'll just finish it, make a main channel video, and then the Patreon, and that'll be great. But it takes me 3 years to get there. But there are some sort of explosive Cubane stuff, which there's azides, substituents on it, and you don't have to try too much because it's so strained to that cube. As soon as you start whacking on, nitro groups or something, there's this explosive called Octanitrocubane, which is always held up as the world's greatest explosive. And the synthesis of that is ridiculous. I mean, it's hard getting to Cubane. It's not so hard anymore. I mean, it's sort of commercially available. But going from the Cubane to Octanitrocubane or even heptanitrocubane, putting nitro groups on every vertice of the cube is very difficult.
How is it done?
Because, well, you start off sort of nice nitrating conditions, and you sort of can get 2, 3, maybe 4 on. But you can't push it too much because you start to destroy the cube, right? Like, you can't put it through extreme conditions in terms of nitrations, like with say nitrating toluene, you can sort of crank it to 11 and, reflux it in red fuming nitric acid and, sulfuric, and you're not going to break the benzene ring down, But if you start to try and do that with a cube, you can start to, the cube with Cubane, it starts to sort of break apart the cube. I think anyway. So you start getting to these increasingly more exotic nitration sort of scenarios. So there's some where they sort of make it into like a thiocyanate, and then they do some weird like rearrangement thing, and then there's like weird nitrating agents that I've just never seen before, but done at like dry ice temperatures, and and that puts an extra nitro group on. And then but the problem with this octanitrocubane is because it was so difficult and at the time very expensive, because it was hard to get that Cubane. The Cubane's still expensive, and then push on from there. That like it's not really been tested all that much. And so there's kind of been one paper that did it, and they said, oh, look, it's fantastic, we did this. And then, there's some computational studies that says, oh, density packing, this is a perfect explosive. It's got a detonation velocity of 10,000, something. But you say, well, has anyone actually made more than a gram and blown it up? And it's like, well, no. Well, then, so because to actually test these things, you need like quantities, you need like actual quantities, and people need to go out in a field and blow it up and do all that sort of thing. And that just hasn't been done. It's been too difficult. So there's this thing, and it's sort of unquestioned in terms of its like superiority of like, oh, it's octanitrocubane. It's the greatest, look at this thing, but at least it's not octanitrocubane. It's got a detonation velocity of this. It's like, well, no one's ever seen that detonation velocity. That comes from computationally, because no one's ever had enough to actually blow it up to the point where it can reach that detonation velocity. So I always, that's where I love that sort of area of chemistry, where I get to do something in my shitty ramshackle lab in a shed and sort of bring a pop culture myth out and say, well, no, it's sort of been overstated because it's so hard to do. And, things in the explosive world get sensed, either don't leave the literature, or they get, a bit sensational when they leave it. That's sort of it, So
I know very little about how explosives are tested. What is the way of objectively characterizing the potency of an explosive?
It's pretty dreadful, honestly. A lot of this was straight out of like, the war effort, World War II sort of thing, where if you were to come up with just randomly think like, oh, how are we going to measure an explosive? And you sort of came up with a couple of ideas. They're probably exactly what is currently done. So a lot of it is compared to like TNT, and there's like standards are like the lead block test, where you just blow up stuff and see how much the lead block deforms, and like it's all very much, and like there's a sand crush test which does what it says on the tin, and you kind of look at it and you're like, this is equivalent to 1.3 TNT, and that's the standard. So everything is just this relative effectiveness factor, which is kind of it is some numbers in it, but a lot of it is just kind of like, crush the lead, 1.3 times as much as TNT, because this relative effectiveness is just compared to TNT, because that's what they had in the 50s. And so, and before then. So, and a lot of that is like, there's like, oh, how do we measure the shock sensitivity of it? And it's like, oh, what if we just like dropped a weight from like, a certain height? It's like, well, that's the standard. And that's been the standard for 100 years, So yeah, there's all the places, all the literature, saying, oh, this complicated synthesis. And then, and then we went out back to the room with the ancient bloody, drop test hammer, that's from the 50s, but that's the standard. And why would we change it? So yeah, explosives are sort of, it's just sort of characterized, because I mean, their outcomes, the military, and the military doesn't give a crap what the structures are. They deal in acronyms and effectiveness, and oh, this is 120% better than TNT. All right, like they don't care.
Right. Yeah. I saw on your channel, it seems like you attach it to a beer can, or like a can. I don't know if it's a beer can actually. It's
Yeah, that's Strongbow apple cider. Still
uh,
waiting for the sponsorship to come through, but
it's an apple
it won't
cider
happen.
can, and then you just sort of shave the can and compare them in terms of how
Mm.
much the can is damaged. Is that your technique?
Yeah, basically. I mean, initially it was just sort of a, we're going to blow something up at the end of a video. But when you look at it and you sort of say, oh, there's all these technical terms like, oh, we're going to have a witness plate and look at, fragmentation from a witness plate. And you look at it and they're just like, oh, yeah, we blew it up on a sheet of metal and counted the pieces. And you're like, well, that's what I'm doing with a beer can. And so you can tell sort of the faster an explosive goes, like the more it builds up that sort of, because they produce gas and they sort of like go out, and the faster that happens, sort of the better, the more it will fragment things around it. Because if you're really slow, you sort of will push a can out the way and dent the can, and the whole can has ability to sort of go back. But if you're really fast, you can sort of punch a hole through the can before the can has a chance to like go backwards. And sort of the faster you punch, because if you punch really slowly, you can imagine that I'll punch like a hole the size of the explosive, or like a sheet of metal will like sort of end up in the can and it'll be like a big sheet of metal. But if I punch super, super fast before anything can react, then I'll end up with all these little fragments of explosives, or little fragments of metal. So it's sort of a term called I don't know. I don't talk to enough people about it. I
Yeah.
read too much without saying things out loud. But yeah, so you can tell from the back of the explosive from where you've done it if there's lots of little holes of shrapnel as opposed to sort of a few big holes. You can kind of infer that it's really fast, and that's sort of a way of a very ramshackle shed way of sort of looking at something called a detonation velocity, which is very hard to measure because it's fast. I mean, it's hundreds of meters, it's 8 kilometers a second. That's like it's sort of speeds. That's how fast the detonation front propels through the explosive, and different explosives have different sort of speeds. And that's kind of one way of looking at it and
Yeah.
comparing them sort of if you're in a backyard.
And
Yeah.
have you had any problems with YouTube? Like I had like an interesting, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this actually.
Yeah.
I had not even uploaded videos to YouTube until recently,
Yeah.
directly. And so I in 2014 had been at a friend's lab and they had a cylinder of xenon, and I was flying
Oh,
back
yeah.
to the US, and my friend asked me if I wanted to inhale some of the xenon, and no one had a balloon, and I was about to get on a plane, so I inhaled it from a condom.
No
And
condoms.
what is that? Which is a balloon.
No condoms either. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. That's right. Yeah.
It's a balloon. It's a form of a balloon. Um, and uh,
Mhm.
and and I uploaded it, and then it got age restricted, and
Mhm.
I think they even like demonetized it because they were saying that it was drug content, which I think is interesting because I would expect that the Cody's lab video of him inhaling the exact same gas and having the exact same drug effect that I had, but the difference is that he is inhaling the gas to characterize the effect on his voice, and
Yeah.
the psychoactive effect is incidental. I'm inhaling the gas for a psychoactive effect, and the effect on my voice is incidental. But we're both doing exactly the same thing with slightly different intentions. And I assume that YouTube only demonetizes one of them. So I thought that was like an interesting example how two people doing
Yeah.
the exact same thing could be received differently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely, there's trouble, and yeah, it's the future, honestly, and the idea that someone is watching your videos and making these decisions is just not the case. It's all the computer. And if you have any, you think, oh well, why has the computer done this? It's because the computer, like there's the algorithm, there's people talk about YouTube as this benevolent sort of, well, not even benevolent, this omnipotent sort of god that sits there. You upload content and it might share it to others, it might strike it down, and it's not that far from the truth in the sense that you can't put this idea of like, oh, there's someone there and they'll make sense of it. It's just the computer, man. Like, yeah, like, so I had my whole channel deleted in 2017. Explosions&Fire 1.
Oh,
Yeah, I had from 2011 to 2017, I got 3 strikes in an hour. One of them was the first video I ever uploaded. I got a strike for putting children in danger, which was myself. I didn't really understand that. I got a strike for
were you a
fire abuse on another video. What?
were you a minor, or what was their?
I mean, I was.
Yeah.
I think I was 16 or something. So it kind of makes sense, but the video was online for 7 years. Well, for 6 years at that point. And it kind of, and I didn't really put that. Did I put a minor in danger? If you put yourself in danger? Anyway, and then I got 1 strike for spam because I'd copy and pasted the Wikipedia article for bread into a description of a video, which in hindsight wasn't the greatest, but there wasn't really character limits, and I wanted to see how much of the description I could get away with. But the video was online for like 2 years or something, or a year. But anyway, I got 3 strikes in
What was the third?
I couldn't. Yeah, so one was spam, one was putting child in danger, one was fire abuse or something. There was some, but there was a moment there. It was late 2017, was it? Yeah, where they just sort of like the computer, all praise to be to the computer, sort of lowered the bar on what was acceptable and what wasn't. So pretty much every sort of energetics channel, explosive channel got deleted or videos removed, pretty much all within 2 weeks. And then the bar sort of got raised back up again. But it can happen at any point. Like, it can just sort of, the computer in all its glory sort of decides, oh, this isn't acceptable, and what can you do?
And what happened to your videos? Are they just deleted immediately and you have no way of recovering them?
Yeah, so you could launch an appeal. I mean, what happens is you get a strike and then you can launch an appeal against that strike, and then it takes a while, and then they can, either accept or deny that. But once you get 3, your channel gets removed, and then you can only launch an appeal for overarching, and you appeal, but praise be to the computer, dear algorithm, and it sort of looks through the keywords and thinks like, nah, this guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Did you lose all of your videos from that channel?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think I had mostly backups, and there was some person, shout out to Henry from the Discord, who was like, yeah, I've got an archive of your channel. It was weird for someone else to have videos of me that I didn't have, but we got them back. But I mean, a lot of them were absolute crap, and it allowed me to sort of restart the channel sort of 2018 with a better format, and that's sort of what you see today. You don't really see those videos. I think we had 70 or something videos, something stupid, but a lot of them were very quick and doing the odd thing, and lets me now do videos where I reuse clips from the old videos and don't have to suffer through so much chemistry to get 3 seconds of shot to show how I did something.
Like, this is frightening to hear. So just to be totally clear, they can just delete everything and you don't get a chance if you didn't have an independent backup or someone else hadn't backed it up, then just in an hour you could lose all of your videos. Is that what
yeah, it doesn't tend to happen so much anymore, but you do get strikes. And it sucks because if you get 2 strikes, you're not allowed to upload for 2 weeks. I think they might have changed it. They just changed things around a little bit. So you get in this little bit of a spiral, because you realize because you kind of want to say, oh, I'm not going to upload, or I'm going to take stuff down because I've got 2 strikes, but you can't upload a video to say that. So you kind of, yeah. And in 2017, I don't know if this is actually the case anymore, but I did actually, when I got the 2 strikes, I was sort of at my computer when it happened. So I actually put all the videos on private, and I got the 3rd strike on a private video. And so I don't know whether it was already, the bloody machine had already made up its mind by that point. It was on private, but yeah, so it happens, and it sucks, and it really does. But it's sort of, I mean, it's what you live and die by in the energetic community anyway. I think I'm surprised. I've always set up the channel just expecting it to get deleted again, and here I am 3 years later, and it's you know, you reach a point where you can get too big that it sort of stops affecting you because you make money for the the mythical computer, and the computer wants you to keep making it money. So it's not going to strike down a channel with 1 million subscribers, for example. But if you've got 100 subscribers, you tend to get it a lot easier. So there's a sort of a threshold, and I potentially am over that now. It'll be difficult for them to delete all my stuff. I don't know whether the computer has emotions or something, but I think it's just about the money.
And was this just energetics or explosive channels, or I remember that there was a similar concern among drug channels as well. I don't know if it was 2017 or when, but it sounded like a lot of these channels were demonetized or something happened to them. Was this like a kind of global crackdown that YouTube was?
Well, I think it goes in phases. Yeah, I think there was a general sort of thing around that time. There was sort of this demonetizing of things, and I've got the odd video age restricted and demonetized, but not as many. Still, some are monetized, which has amazed me. And I think I'm sort of drawing a conclusion that maybe the demonetized ones are the ones where I say, and the ones where I don't say, it's fine. So I think there's a stronger correlation. I think I've said in 4 videos, and 3 out of the 4 are demonetized, and they're the only 3 that are demonetized. So I'm sort of thinking it's probably should put that word away and not bring it out. So I feel like I'm less Australian for it, but sorry. So I've just ruined this video. Feel free to beep it out. But yeah, but that's the nature of I keep going back to this thing, but I heard you were in one of your podcasts or something, and you said when you're making for TV, and it's an interesting parallel, because you sort of said you're making things too technical for like the sensory board, that they didn't know what they were looking at, so it was hard for them to censor.
Yes.
It's sort of, was that that was the case, right? But in that case, it's actually, who the people are. Like there's a bunch of people, I guess media people, who sit in a room and watch your content and take notes and say, no, think of the children. Is that how it works?
It's a room of lawyers, none of whom have even a skeletal understanding of chemistry, and so sometimes that works to my advantage in terms of the synthesis stuff. That works to my advantage. When it does not work to my advantage is in anything having to do with drug law. So like, for example, I really wanted to demonstrate the synthesis of 5-MeO DMT in Mexico for my show. And the legal department immediately said, no, of course you can't. It's DMT. You can't, it's a controlled substance. And I was like, no, it's 5-methoxy DMT. And they were like, well, that's still DMT. And and then it turns into this thing where it's like, well, yes, it has DMT in its name, but I could also call it, like trimethyl serotonin if you prefer. We can give it a different name. We can give it all kinds of different names. If it's only the name that is a problem because it contains DMT, we can call it whatever you want. And it's had many names historically. So, but it's a huge thing where they were just fixated on the fact that DMT was contained in its name. So I was like, okay, that's it. We're no more calling it 5-MeO DMT. From now on, it's trimethyl serotonin. So you have to find evidence that trimethyl serotonin is a controlled substance. And I had to hire a lawyer in Mexico to go through all this independently, and then had to do it again because there was a chemist in Mexico who was a fan of the show, and she owned a lab. And she said that I could visit and do the synthesis there, but then another executive at this lab we had to do the whole thing again, where he was saying like, well, this is DMT. And I was doing the same thing with chemists then, where I was like, I see what you're saying, but it's not, it really isn't. And so that was a mess. That was a real mess. But then when it comes to the synthesis, really all they could do is say, could someone follow this and commit a crime? And I think for the most part, the answer is
you're responsible for other people's crimes. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the whole idea of it is ridiculous to begin with.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, the answer is no. You know, it like the whole like emphasis on mechanisms initially was done so that I could talk about the chemistry in a way that didn't focus on like quantities of reagents and reaction conditions, which I knew would be more scandalous for them.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, the mechanism, that's like, I'm talking about the reaction, but not in a way that is something that can immediately inform the synthesis. And then I kind of started to think that was cool anyway. So I like got into it as just like an alternative way of describing these things, which I think is like, you know, sometimes it's like a very basic thing, like a, you know, like a Birch reduction or something, where it's like, in terms of what you're adding, it's not all that, it's just like lithium and ammonia in the conventional Birch reduction, but like mechanistically, it's totally fascinating what's going on. So it actually like adds a lot of depth and complexity to these processes that I started to actually think is really like cool from a storytelling perspective. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I think more than anything, it's like most people haven't really challenged it because people have been so afraid, and because I think there's never even been a TV show that does that kind of thing to begin with, or that I'm aware of. Like, I think the only other thing that exists are YouTube videos where people show the chemistry. I think outside of my show and YouTube, there are very few, and then maybe like the informational CD-ROMs that like used to come with textbooks. Like, there's just like not a lot in terms of like video representation of chemical reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And which is why we get in a bit of a fuss whenever YouTube starts giving strikes down. But it's sort of a similar process, I suppose, but instead of lawyers, it's a computer. And that, because the computer goes through, I mean, like, all it has to deal with is, you know, what you say in the video and sort of what the machine learning thing thinks your thumbnail looks like, which is becoming increasingly more of a thing, which is nonsense. You know, so the YouTube will target a video to certain people depending on what it thinks the content is. You know, there used to be tags. Tags used to mean something. It used to say, oh, chemistry sort of thing. But now it sort of looks at the thumbnail and the computer thinks like, oh, this is a science flask because I'm going to show it to science people. You know, it's really increasingly less and less controlled. Yeah, a lot of it is. I mean, and it's not publicly sort of known and that sort of stuff. So people might call me a crackpot for saying that sort of thing, but it's, you know, I mean, like, how else does it work? You know, it's not, you know, some videos work, some videos don't. You know, ideally, if thumbnail never came into it, then I should be able to put a black, you know, anyway, I feel like but like, it's increasingly what's happening, and that's why you have issues where I could be talking about explosives and say cunt, and that's easier for the computer to say, oh, well, you know, that's obviously what he said, you know, but yeah. And like with ChemPlayer, going back to that, so they did a lot of drug adjacent videos, but if you look at what they got their strikes for, I think one of them was they've just made a chocolate cake. They did a whole video on making a chocolate cake, but they titled it "Synthesizing My Favorite Psychoactive Substance." So that got their first strike. I think that's what really brought their channel down. So they were genuinely like sort of making drug adjacent stuff, but it was the chocolate cake video that got the strike, because one of them, and like, so there's this, and a lot of people tend to tiptoe around it, and I don't like that. I don't like the way it's going in terms of having this, you know, guard tower up there where, you know, it watches everyone, but you don't know if anyone's actually in the guard tower kind of thing, where instead of giving people strikes, it's the idea of giving strikes that people tend to just stay safer, you know, so they don't talk about things. You know, there's a lot less drug information, I suppose, on YouTube because people don't want to talk about it for fear of having that, you know, the results. So I'm excited for your channel, and hopefully nothing happens to it. It's good. It's fantastic to see you on YouTube. It's great. It's a new world, is it? Yeah.
I mean, like, it's interesting because I genuinely, like, if someone said like, what is more dangerous to make a YouTube video about, making an explosive or making a psychoactive drug, I would say making an explosive. Do you feel the opposite is true?
No. I mean, I feel like I shouldn't really be making explosives on YouTube.
You feel
And
you
the fact
shouldn't?
that well, I mean, not that I shouldn't, but like, I feel like I get away with more than I expected to. I don't know, because it's easy to say, well, I don't show anything, but it's very easy for someone to sort of do stuff just little steps further than me. And it would be wrong for me to say, oh, well, they're being more detailed than I am, so their channel should be deleted and mine should be fine. It's hard to say where you draw that line. And in previous, 10 years ago, there wasn't a line there. You could just put up an acetone peroxide synthesis and blow up a mailbox, and she'll be right. But the line needs to be somewhere, but I'm not really one to say where it is. And it's hard. Yeah, it's genuinely hard. But I wish it wasn't this monopoly on YouTube. That's what I don't like, because then whatever the YouTube gods say kind of goes. And having this alternative, there's no audience on Vimeo. You can't make a living as a Vimeo creator. And then you say, oh, well, there's all these alternate platforms. But the problem is, because they're alternate platforms, they get filled first full of these like cronks and, people, anti-vaxxers and COVID-19, and it feels wrong to upload a video to those sites. So I feel like, because there's just this one video site that has to make rules that applies to, children's videos, to this, to that. I just wish there was a little bit more of, oh, I'm making, video for, adults or something, or, stupid videos for stupid adults, so I'm going to upload it to the platform that does that, and then it's not like the same rules are applying to the children, and and then I've got to. Does that make any sense? I haven't really thought about this as much as I as I probably should have, because I
Yeah,
thought you might ask me this, but yeah.
I feel the same way. Like, there's part of me that wants to say there is no line. Everything should be permitted. And because I have a very kind of, I have, maybe this is too idealistic, but I do have this attitude that any information is good. And if it's truthful,
Yeah.
it is good, and it will ultimately serve the greater good. And it is our responsibility, if it does cause harm, to use more information to solve that harm. And that the
Yeah.
solution is always truth and transparency. That's my idealistic attitude. But that doesn't take into account a lot of foolish things that people do. And then I think, well, okay, of course people are foolish. Still, information should be available. It's hard. It's hard to say. And then
Yeah.
the side of this that it's very easy to talk about the worst case scenario, but I think probably both of us see a very positive side of it. I certainly do, which is that
Absolutely.
enormous numbers of like high school students, college students contact me saying like they're changing their majors, or they're going to study chemistry because this was the first time that they even realized that chemistry was as fascinating as it is. And I think that in the US, at least, there's like this really boring curriculum of chemistry education that almost intentionally neglects to acknowledge all of the things that historically have made people interested in chemistry, which is the synthesis of drugs and medicines and explosives and dyes and things that are industrially useful. And you kind of like start out with general chemistry, which is like a great way to ensure that no one is interested in anything. And it's like what is the result of that? We are like cutting out a really crucial part of science education from people's lives by teaching it in the most boring way possible. And anything that you can do to make it more interesting, I think, is like a boon to mankind.
And you get to college or university, and some of the first things they say to you is like, "Oh, forget everything you've learned in high school. It's not correct. It's too simplified. We'll teach you how to really do it." And so you kind of spend all this time doing like Lewis dot structures and nomenclature and how to name things, and like real tasks that, like, the amount of time you spend on Lewis dot structures. So then if you continue on, it just gets put in they say, "Oh, forget about that. That's absolute nonsense." And you say, well, like, why teach you an approximate, like, if you are going to teach anyone anything, then why teach them like sort of an approximate incorrect way of doing things when you could just be teaching them at least something like it's not useful, it's not correct, it's not, so you might as well do something interesting and inspire people. I mean, it sounds really lame when you say that, but like, you know, you know what I mean? Like you might as well do like some chemistry in high school rather than just learning incorrect things you're not going to use anyway. Like,
Oh yeah.
and I wonder if that is a lot of this like drugs, because I mean high school. I mean you must have an entire thing, like the battle against high school and the things people learn in high school is just like people spend their entire lives trying to unlearn that,
Ha.
and with the drug stuff, like it's there for, everyone's exposed to this sort of misinformation,
Oh
absolutely.
yeah.
And
And then it like breeds distrust and resentment in any thinking person, because they say, not only did you not teach me about this, what you did teach me about it, and it was a lie. You went out of your way to say something dishonest about the subject, making me less knowledgeable about the subject matter. Like how could you do that? And then like when I was in college, there was always this idea about like, if like as a scientist, science communication with the public is your responsibility. So you have to figure out ways to make scientific ideas as digestible and simple as possible for public consumption. And I remember thinking like, this is so patronizing and condescending and stupid. Why would anyone want to change science in any way for public consumption? Like, is that like, why not show people exactly what it is and let them get interested in it for all of its complexity? Why not like just let people appreciate it for what it actually is, as opposed to distorting it and transforming it into something that it's not?
Yeah. And you have that idea of like, and there's a lot of that these days. Like, well, why don't people just trust the scientists? But yeah, and you go through high school and you're taught, all drugs are bad, and then you leave it, and scientists are like, well, I guess they're not all bad. Then immediately you think, well, I'm not going to trust these scientists. I've spent the last 10 years of my life, you know, and now, the scientists are lying to me because this is something I believe because, or in Australia, and at least they were taught to me by a lovable giraffe called Harold.
Oh, I don't
That's
know
in
about
Australia. All right, healthy Harold
that. Oh,
comes
I don't
around a
know.
little camper van. I don't think he does it anymore, but people of my generation, it's sort of it goes across the country. He's got a long neck. He's a giraffe, and he tells you to say no to drugs. It's beautiful. Um,
Yeah,
that's Harold.
that's like something I'm curious about in Australia, because Australia is very different from the United States in terms of its synthetic drug economy, because you're so isolated
Yeah,
that like
yeah. China.
cocaine is basically not an option economically. I mean, I know it exists there, but it's so much
Yeah.
more difficult to get into the country. And so meth and synthetic drugs in general seem like just a better option in Australia. Is that something that like you've encountered?
Well, I mean, you don't have to talk about drugs to. You can talk about any single industry in Australia and say, we could manufacture it here, or we could ship it in from China, and that has done every single industry in, from pharmaceuticals to steel to any manufacturing, electronics. So there's this, yeah. So it's sort of changed. I mean, obviously in the last year or so, as things got harder to get shipped over, people thought, oh shit, maybe we should be manufacturing some of this ourselves. Like now we can't get anything that we need, like gloves or something. And it's like, do we make any gloves locally? Like, no. Do we make hand sanitizer locally? Oh, but China, it's so easy to get. Anyway, so yeah, like we have all this weird stuff where like we have all this iron ore and we'll dig up the iron ore and then ship it to China, and then China will turn it to steel and then we'll buy the steel back because it's more economical to do that than put it into the steel mill that's next to the iron ore mine. And so we Australia, yeah, and so there's there's a lot of news lately with China relations in Australia because because China can kind of just be like, oh, we're not going to buy Australian wine today because we didn't like what you said in the news last week, what your prime minister said about China, and so the Australian wine stocks plummet, or they didn't buy lobster or something, and the lobster price like all these people were throwing away lobsters because China wasn't buying lobsters or something, So anyway, I'm getting off track here. So there's a lot of that. I think with the yeah, you let me ramble. What are you doing? There's a lot of that in the sort of the drug world, I think. And but anyway, well, that's the part that makes the news as far as I'm aware. People do. There's a lot of busted shipments and blah blah blah, this and that, but of course they would publicize it anyway.
And did you
But
say that you had some issue or that people had come to raid your
oh
lab?
yeah. So what happens because there's sort of glassware restrictions. They're not laws. Not you're allowed to have glassware, but there's sort of laws in terms of like documentation. It's basically bookkeeping. So if I buy glassware from a local source or interstate here in Australia, they sort of have to fill out a form and send it to the police and say, well, this person isn't making drugs with it. That's basically, you tick the box and you say, yeah, no, I'm not going to make drugs. And I don't know why that exists. I don't know whether it's just easier to prosecute me with a crime, because then they can say, oh no, you lied on a legal document, we'll get you with that. You said you weren't going to make drugs and you did, But I mean, it doesn't really happen too much in terms of like the form, but like some glassware get a bit like, but if you buy it from China or buy it internationally, then none of that happens. So what happens, and of course it's like a quarter of the price to buy stuff from China, even when you include shipping, because that applies to everything. So people will buy glassware in China, and this is what I do as well, or when things could be shipped. And then the glassware goes through customs. Customs X-ray it. They see, oh look, you've got some glassware. That's not illegal. We're going to deliver it. So they deliver it, and then they alert your local police station, and then your police station wait 1 to 2 weeks, and then they turn up at your house and just say, hello, we delivered some glassware to you, or you received some glassware. What are you using that for? And so that's happened twice for me now. And the thing is, because the amateur chemistry community in Australia talks to each other, like I fully expected it to happen. Like it was pretty much on cue. Like, and it's nice. It's nice being in Australia because, and I've got nothing against the police really. Yeah, and it's always been very positive, and it's nice because the worry is that they escalate things and they say, oh, they come and kick my door down in at 4 a.m. and the American police kind of trope, guns blazing. But they just turned up on like a Sunday afternoon and was like, hey, and they legitimately like opened the door and were like, are you making methamphetamines? And I was like, no. And they were like, oh, okay. And so I showed them around, but genuinely like just deadpan, like, are you making methamphetamines? And the second time, so that was the first time, this was local cops, and they sort of looked at the shit and were like, this is a lot. I was like, well, I had a lab notebook. That's a pro tip for people. If you're doing amateur chemistry stuff, have a notebook, have stuff written down so that if police turn up, you can point to the book and say, this is what I've been doing. And they can read it. They won't understand a word of it. They don't know what I was doing, some business stuff at the time. Sure, that's never occurred to them, but at least they can see it's not like they're looking for you. They're just looking for open pill packets and like big drawings of amphetamine structures, So as soon as you point them as something else. The second time was a little worse because I wasn't home the time they turned up, and it was like drug squad rather than the local police. It was the same sort of mechanism, but I think they were just bored. It was like a Friday afternoon or something, and so the drug squad turned up, and they sort of went round the corner of my house and sort of saw some stuff set up, and so they decided to call some more people in. So it was a bit of a thing. But
is this a bomb squad?
No, they thought they were going to call I thought they were going to pull the bomb squad in, and I think they were going to do it, but I think I sort of said that they didn't. But the interesting was that was the time I was making sulfur nitride. So I was passing ammonia through sulfur chlorides, which I'd made from sulfur and chlorine. And so I had distillation set up like out the wazoo. Half of it was covered in sulfur. This was like sort of like I hadn't packed stuff down because I was doing stuff. It was like a long weekend and I was doing stuff. But like trying to explain it to these two dudes, I was like, all right, sulfur, and and I'm passing chlorine through it. And he like got his notebook out and he's like, sulfur. How do you spell that? And I was like, this is going to be a long night. I think it would have been easier if I just said, making methamphetamines, because they wouldn't let me go out there without any extra backup. They wouldn't let me turn on lights, sort of thing. So it ended up being what they ended up doing. And this sounds like a really sweet job, but there was a translator chemist. This was after hours or something. It just ended up being like 10 p.m. at night. This guy comes out who was their expert. And I don't think I heard him say a word, but there was, two drug squad. There was like 3 local police and this one chemist translator. And then the police would just go around this table and they'd point at this and they'd be like, what's that? And I'd be like, oh, well, that's my drying column because I need to dry the ammonia before it goes into the sulfur chlorides or it all hydrolyzes. And they all like just start like glazed eyes over, but then they'd all turn, look at this one translator, and he'd stand there and just like, and then they'd point another thing like, what is that green liquid? And it's like, oh, that's my condenser water. I just dyed it green because I thought it was fun. They all look, and the guy would like pause for like 20 seconds, process it, and like. But probably the weirdest moment of my life was when, because they didn't let me turn any lights on, so they're there with their police flashlights, and you can have the nicest lab in the world, which mine wasn't at the time, but like as soon as it's dark and you've got the police spotlights and they're just highlighting different parts, it looks like something you've dug out of a basement in Chernobyl type thing. It's like this spooky thing. But they go into the lab and I've got this chalkboard where I draw stuff up, and people can pledge on Patreon to let me draw, so they can suggest a thing to draw for a couple dollars, and I'll draw it up and it'll be there in the video or something like that. So little like things in the background, like, hey, I want to draw this ice cream or draw whatever, and I'll draw it up there. Well, someone had requested a My Little Pony drawing with like chemistry on it, and so all these police come in and they all point their flashlights at this thing, and they all just converge on this My Little Pony figurine that's like this little like rainbow dash with like that I've drawn up there. And it was just like a 20 seconds of like them just like what felt like it, where they were just looking at it, not a single word, and then just moved on. And I was like, I can't explain this. Like there's so many levels of like, for them to be like, what is this guy doing? Like, what's My Little Pony stuff? But yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare. But the cool thing is they didn't escalate it, and they were concerned. I mean, they said they were concerned about me getting paid or forced to make amphetamines for someone, and I sort of mentioned I'm doing a bit of I've got my PhD for defense, and I think that helped a lot because they're police, and they said, I think they said, as long as you keep working for the good guys, like that was their, it's so cut and dry, isn't it? Like they legitimately use the term good guys to describe, don't let any bad guys tell you to make drugs. Okay. But they were a little bit.
Like I've seen Breaking Bad, but are there actually instances of chemists being enslaved to work in?
Nah, I mean, there's a lot of examples of chemists getting enslaved to work in research labs and universities, but I haven't seen, there's a lot less pay in that. But I mean, I haven't, who knows? I mean, I've not really got my finger on the pulse in terms of the underworld of here, but there's always a risk, because people could just come to people could steal stuff, break in, and set fire to everything, and that's my biggest concern. But because the stuff is valuable in terms of and I don't want to advertise that, but I also don't, that's my biggest fear. But
that happened. It happened to me one time. I had a thing where I was in South Africa, and I was trying to go to different Quaalude labs, and there was like a kingpin guy who was like, okay, I can introduce you to this person that runs a lab. This is actually a different lab from the one that I ended up filming in. And we went out to get like breakfast together. And I was like, wow, thank you so much for being trusting enough to talk with me about this chemistry. Like, like, I'm so excited. I've always wanted to see this. This is like, don't worry, you can trust me. And he was like, okay, so 40,000 US dollars. And I was like, oh, you want me to pay you 40,000 US dollars to observe this? Because it's not going to happen. I cannot afford that.
Oh, your budget isn't that big? No.
And he was like, no, I'm going to pay you 40,000 US dollars
All
to
right.
synthesize this drug. And I was like, well, I'm really flattered. Like, I appreciate, like, it's very nice of you. It's also a very generous offer, and it's more money than I'm making in my current job, so it's tempting, and it would be fun, but I can't
But
do
yeah,
it now. Maybe later, maybe at a different time, but not now.
yeah.
Yeah. But he
And
was friendly.
before anyone gets any ideas, yeah, that's not really where my skills lie, I don't think. I think I'm genuinely actually not very. I'm enthusiastic, and I try things even though I think they're not going to work. But I see people who are actually good at organic chemistry, and I think, like, fuck, that's not me. I don't think I can pull stuff. Some people just have it. They're able to do sort of like chemistry easily and make organic chemistry things work and crystallize, and just don't think I've got it. I mean, it might be because I do most of the stuff in like jam jars and like, spider infested shed, but it's just, yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I don't think I've anything special in terms of that regard. So yeah.
And
Anyway.
and like, in terms of your channel, you mentioned, so you've been doing this for years, you're taking a break to finish your PhD.
Yeah.
Is there, like, what is the, outside of Cubane, is there like a big project that you're hoping to do, or is there some kind of white whale
Yeah.
that you're
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I'd love to do some xenon chemistry. There's this explosive called xenon trioxide, and I remember seeing years ago, there's this like 50s or 60s video where some guy, no, it can't be 50s, it must be 60s or 70s, because xenon it wasn't even expected to form into
until the 60s? Yeah.
any compounds. Yeah, and then they made this xenon difluoride, they made xenon tetrafluoride, but if you get xenon tetrafluoride or xenon hexafluoride, dissolve that in water and evaporate it, what you're left with is xenon trioxide, which is amazing. It's xenon and 3 oxygens. So naturally, it's this like extremely powerful explosive, extremely sensitive, because you just form xenon and oxygen. And there's also like perxenates, xenates, all these xenon-based oxidizers, which are very aggressive. But the problem is you need to start from xenon tetrafluoride or xenon hexafluoride. And they are not available, as I'm aware. People who work with it make it in situ, make it, because all you need is xenon and fluorine gas. And for a commercial lab, you can buy a cylinder of fluorine gas, but that's not something, even if I could buy it, I wouldn't buy. It's just too dangerous to do.
Yeah.
And I think I'd get into trouble anyway, because if I start buying like the nickel fluoride, the fluorine resistant nickel alloys, then the government starts to come in because they think I'm enriching uranium. So there's some very strict laws around that, and don't fuck with the nuclear commission. In my state at least, they don't need warrants, they don't need anything. They're a league of their own. So don't fuck with the nuclear commission. So I'm not going to do that. But yeah, so I need a lab, and so they're not commercially valuable. And of course, the xenon fluorides, they react with glass, they hydrolyze in air to form hydrofluoric acid. So they're a nightmare to ship. But I'd love that. I'd love some. I can get xenon difluoride. It's difficult, but I can pull some connections, I think, to get some of that. But you can't convert the difluoride, as far as I'm aware, to the tetrafluoride. So you can't get to xenon trioxide via that. So that's my white whale. So I'm attempting to pull some connections, like, hey, let me into your fluorine lab, but I don't think that's gonna do that. And there's also there's a lot of fluorine related oxidizing stuff that people always comment, like, oh, why doesn't he do chlorine trifluoride? And there's a lot of misinformation about that one, because there's chlorine trifluoride. It was sort of, it's sort of got this connotation as a Nazi chemical because they tried to make it and they had sort of some big industrial accident with it and it burnt through all this concrete. And it's this horrendously aggressive oxidizer that will set sand on fire, it will set glass on fire. It'll do anything. But whether or not it's actually as bad as what it's meant to be, because there's no videos of it. Well, not really. There's no one's really, but it's an industrial chemical. People use it in the semiconductor industry. I mean, a lot of things are used in the semiconductor industry that you normally wouldn't want to be around. But there's a lot of that in terms of like people use chlorine trifluoride to do things. So it can't be a completely unstorable monster of a thing. So I'd love to be able to go somewhere where that's being used and film that and show it off, because that's, you know, it's just something I can't do fluorine chemistry. I mean, no matter how many times people ask me, I'm not going to do fluorine chemistry. It's just too toxic. And anytime, you know, it's like I could deal with the dissolving of glass. I could deal with the extreme oxidizing things, you know, but I can't deal with the fact that it turns into HF and will pull all the calcium from my blood and sediment it and give me death. So
Yeah.
that's what I can't do. That's why I like chlorine-based oxidizers, because there's absolutely wild chlorine ones that I'd love to do. Stuff like chlorine heptoxide, which is Cl2O7. It's a chlorine oxidizer. It's a liquid at room temperature. Ridiculously explosive, very unstable. But, you know, so there's chlorine dioxide, which is this yellow gas, which can detonate. It sort of just disproportionates and detonates, but you can push it further into this dichlorine heptoxide, which is stupendously dangerous. All the preps are from the 30s, which is just like, oh, we distilled it at room temperature. You know, it was fine, but 2 out of 3 times, you know, we lost the distillation apparatus. Like, yeah, genuinely, like, yeah, like they write in there, like, yeah, no, Bob had to go to hospital, but like, you know, he pulled it off. But at least then I know that if it all evaporates or sprays somewhere, you know, I'm not going to have to go to the hospital and I don't have to slather me in, you know, calcium gel to heighten my small percentage of survival. You know, it's dangerous, but like the fluorine stuff is it's beyond what I'm capable of doing. And there's a limit of what I can do. And so it'll be great when I come back to be able to pull connections and go travel. I mean, like yourself, you know, where, you know, it wouldn't be, you know, your show if you just sit in the same place. You know, you got to be able to go places and show it and do things to sort of get to the next level of presenting. But in terms of big synthesis projects, I'm sure there's some. I'm going to think of some.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot to do
in doing that, because I feel like, again, like same thing with industrial processes. Like I wanted to film the cryogenic fractional distillation of xenon. Again,
Oh yeah,
no video of that. Like it would not that you could show it inside the actual, you know, like distillation column, but just to even see any aspect of it. Like it's amazing how these industrial processes have seemingly never been documented in a way that people can see how they're done.
Yeah, because like lab scale stuff, you feel like, oh, things are dangerous. They'll never use that in industry. But like industry, there's nothing industry can't do. There's no chemical that industry can't use. You know, fluorine gas is just a thing used in industry. And so there's ways of dealing with literally anything that needs to be done as long as it's profitable. But just, you know, you don't see that. You don't know what it is. And a lot of it, you know, is secretive, I suppose, but I don't know why. But yeah, like there's nothing, it's like manufacturing and stuff and how things are made. You know, like people love to pull back the curtain on the food chain and like, oh, look, this is where the pigs are slaughtered, you know. But like the chemistry chain, you know, like I order a thing from Sigma Aldrich and it turns up and you think like, well, where did this come from? Like absolutely, you know, like there has to be things made somewhere and who knows?
Right. Yeah. And if anyone does look into it, it's from this like chemophobic perspective of demonstrating that it's bad as opposed to just pure curiosity.
Yeah. And you'll see papers like from, you know, the 70s, like, oh, here's how, we could potentially ferment, this thing to this thing using this, process and that sort of thing. But then you think like, well, yeah, but how are they doing that on an industrial scale where I could buy this, 100-gram pack of erythritol for $3? Like it's
Yeah.
like industrial chemistry is amazing, and it's yeah, absolutely. But that's it. I think we've solved it. We need more field trips for high schoolers to industrial chemistry sites. That's it. Like, surely, even trip to the petroleum plant. Don't go to the fucking milkshake or ice cream factory. Get a petroleum plant, the erythritol manufacturing center. Like, that's maybe I own that, but that'd be cool.
Well, I mean, yeah, like that's why I've been to China 4 times, and every time it's to go to factories. Like it's like a in manufacturing playground, and I have never been to. I've never seen any tourist sites in China. Every time I go, I am just going to labs, which is so amazing. Like just the best thing. You never get to see any of that, and it's like, oh wow, that's how they do it. That's how it's done. Who knew?
Yeah, it's just all seamless, like aluminium plants, like the amount of effort that has to go into wrapping a burrito in aluminium is phenomenal. And you never even stop to think like, shit, man, like like the chemistry that has to go behind like an aluminium smelter and refinery and digging it up from the ground, and the electricity is made, and you don't even like recycle it. And it's like, it's anyway, that's the modern world, isn't it? I guess just things happen and you just say, you just got to accept it.
Wow. Wow. This is like, I mean, I think this is like a good, are there any like final things you think we should talk about? I think this is like an awesome, like an awesome discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've just been rambling a lot, but I've expressed my awe at how good your show is. Yeah, that's good. I enjoyed it very much. So
I'm glad you liked it.
All right.
Yeah.
Season 4, are we talking, or you don't want to think about it?
I think I'm planning to just do chemistry like full time, because it was so insanely difficult making the show this last season. Like, not just the pandemic, just like the meth episode in particular. There's so much, just so much legal fear and dealing with so many mentally ill people. It's just a lot of like just difficulty, like a very, very, and I'm okay with things being very hard, but I'm subjecting like 20 other people to things that are just perpetually a mess, and it's stressful and dangerous. And like I thought I had a pretty good grasp of the dangers associated with a lot of the reactions, but like, for example, I'd never even considered, like, I was like, okay, like making like ethyl sulfate from sulfuric acid and ethanol, like, oh, and like a side product might be diethyl ether. It's like an old reaction. It's been done the first time like 300 years ago or something like that. So I was thinking, like, okay, whatever, that's not especially dangerous. And then it wasn't until I finished filming it that I thought about the possibility of diethyl sulfate being produced as a side product. And then it was like, oh man, how many things like that are going on where there's some unanticipated hazard that exists while we're doing all of this.
Yeah. So you're taking a break from the stress and the dangers and settling down to just do chemistry. It's an interesting, because that's the cause of all my stress and danger in my life. It's the chemistry.
but I think the stresses of chemistry are nice, because you can actually like attach them directly to it. Like if a reaction doesn't go well, like that is a lesson in how not to do that reaction. You're always learning something if you're, like measuring things and recording the reaction conditions.
Yeah. No, I get you. Well, if I ever finish the Cubane synthesis, I'll save you some.
Yeah, please. Yeah. I look forward to everything that you release in the future, and good luck with the rest of your work. your
Thank
graduate
you.
work.
Yeah, it's a shame to go, but I'm getting some cool things. I don't know how I've been given some opportunities this year. Once again, these lists, I don't know, man. These lists have not prevented some things from happening in my life, but I wish I could talk about them more. But yeah, no, it's cool. But I really miss making videos, and I've still got one more to release, I think. So I miss it, and I haven't even stopped doing it yet. But I know I will. Yeah, but absolutely. People say, oh, once you stop making YouTube videos, we'll come back and sort of thing. But nah, I've been making them for like a third of my life. I've got to keep making them.
Yeah.
Don't know how to live outside of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they're great. Please do continue. And
All right.
and send me this audio recording, and yeah, keep me updated
Absolutely.
on all your projects. I'm really curious about what you're up to over there.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. No, it's absolutely great to speak with you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Feel free to drop past my Discord. They go mental at any mention of you, man.
I actually don't even know what Discord is.
Yeah.
I'm like really behind. I've never.
Yeah, it's
like, what is
yeah,
Discord?
it's just like all right. Now you sound like my security clearance. Discord is yeah, it's just sort of a chat platform, but it's a little bit more organized than a lot of other things. There's sort of rooms, and the idea is that topics are assigned to rooms. So if you want to say, I want to talk about this certain thing, and then you go to that room, and so everyone sort of has access to all the things, but it stops it being one free flowing, nonsense chat room. Like, so that's generally the idea. I think I'm not an expert either, but I'm like an admin on there, and all the other admins are like, don't do that. I click on things and ruin it constantly. They can't kick me out. So it's good. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, I should learn more about it. But yeah, keep me updated with any videos or any like scientific publications or anything. I'd love to see it. And,
all right. Yep.
And yeah, it was.
And if you're in a fluorine lab, let me know. Okay.
I will. I certainly will.
Get to this mythical. This is the white whale. Yep, absolutely. Okay. All right. Cool.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. Talk to you later.
All right.